What would you risk on the coldest night of your life if a desperate howl was the only thing breaking the silence? In the heart of a historic blizzard, John Parker had every reason to stay inside. No family waiting, no one left to miss him. But when a battered German shepherd's bark cut through the storm, John lit his lantern and stepped into the blinding white. What he found beneath the playground slide would change everything. A silent little girl, clinging to the only friend she had left in the world. If you believe that kindness can spark hope, even in the darkest winter, give this video a like. And if you want to follow more true stories where love, loyalty, and second chances change lives, hit subscribe and join our community. Stay with us. Because this isn't just a rescue story. It's the beginning of a journey that will test what it really means to be family. In Billings, Montana, winter wasn't just a season. It was an event. This storm, though, was historic. Snow roared sideways across Main Street, burying parked trucks in ghostly white drifts, shuttering every shop, silencing the world. Beneath the rage of wind and sleet, only the faintest signs of life remained. The pulse of a distant siren, the flicker of yellow porch lights, the stubborn bark of a dog far from home. John Parker, wrapped in a battered canvas coat, his gloved hands numb, should have stayed inside. He had no one waiting, no one worrying, and after months alone in that silent house, it was almost easier to disappear. But the howl carried through the storm, a German shepherd, frantic and insistent, barking into the white void. John cursed under his breath, then lit his lantern and braced himself against the cold. He trudged through thigh-high snow, every step a small battle, each breath burning his throat. The storm blinded him, but the barking never faded. He reached the playground, or what was left of it, a tangle of frozen swings and an ice-coated jungle gym, barely visible in the whirling dark. The dog, gray-black, limping, half ice itself, circled a mound by the slide, its voice ragged with panic. "Hey, boy," John called, uncertain. "Easy now. What is it?" That's when he saw the small shape in the snow, his heart hammered. He dropped to his knees, scraping at the frozen crust, his gloves clumsy. Oh, God. There, barely breathing, was a little girl. No more than 3, John guessed, her blonde hair tangled with frost, her bare feet purple against the white. She clung to the dog's collar, eyes open but unfocused, her lips blue. John moved fast, instincts taking over. He wrapped her in his coat, pressing her close to his chest, feeling the alarming chill of her skin. "Stay with me, sweetheart. You hear me?" The dog, Max, as he'd later learn, wouldn't let go of her, nosing her face, whimpering. John scooped them both, struggling to his feet as the wind howled harder, the playground vanishing behind him. The walk back felt endless, every step a fight against snow and gravity and fear. Twice he stumbled, nearly dropping the girl, but Max nudged him, guiding his way like a battered guardian angel. By the time John burst into his kitchen, both he and the girl were shaking uncontrollably. He set her down by the fire, tearing off his gloves, checking her pulse, wrapping her in every blanket he owned. He grabbed his phone, dialing 911 with clumsy, trembling fingers. "I found a child. She's half frozen, needs help fast. Send someone, please." The dispatcher's voice was a lifeline in the chaos, instructing him on how to warm her up, warning about frostbite, telling him to keep talking, keep her awake. But the girl didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't even blink. She just stared past John, her tiny fists locked in the shepherd's fur, as if only the dog could keep her here in this world. Max, battered and frostbitten himself, stayed pressed to her side, growling softly whenever John got too close. Sirens finally cut through the night. headlights throwing wild shadows on the frosted windows. Paramedics rushed in, voices urgent, as they lifted the girl onto a stretcher and checked her for injuries. John tried to explain, but the room spun, the heat, the stress, the raw terror. She was out there alone. No shoes. This dog. He saved her. The shepherd snapped at a medic reaching for the girl, making everyone freeze. Only when the girl whimpered did the dog relax, shivering, exhausted. The EMT looked at John, uncertain. "You her father?" John shook his head. "No, I just found her." The next hours blurred. Police took statements, asking sharp questions. Why was John out in the storm? Did he know the girl? Had he seen anyone else? John's answers felt thin and inadequate, his hands still shaking. The paramedics left with the girl, promising updates. The shepherd, Max, refused to be separated, growling and fighting until finally, an officer agreed to let him ride along in the ambulance. John stood in his empty kitchen, heart pounding, a mug of untouched coffee cooling on the counter. Only the sound of the clock broke the silence. What had just happened? He'd gone out a lonely widower, desperate for something, anything, to break the numbness. Now the whole town would know his name by morning. He barely slept. Snow hammered the roof, as if trying to break in. His mind replayed the girl's face, her ghostly silence, the fierce devotion in that battered dog's eyes. He thought of his own wife, gone now a year, and the weight of all that loss pressed in around him. Morning came gray and bitter. The phone rang and John braced himself for more questions. Instead, it was the sheriff. "Mr. Parker, you'd better come down to the hospital. There's some things you need to see. And bring a friend. This is going to get complicated." Outside, the blizzard had finally broken. Snow glittered under a thin blue sky, bright and unforgiving. John looked back at his empty house, feeling the strange sense that everything had changed. He didn't know yet about Maddie's family or the storm his actions would set loose. He just knew he'd answered a call in the dark, and nothing would ever be the same. The news of the blizzard rescue traveled faster than the morning thaw. By sunrise, every neighbor in Billings seemed to know that John Parker, the quiet carpenter from the edge of town, had brought a half-frozen child and a battered German shepherd into his home. Some called him a hero. Others whispered darker suspicions. By mid-morning, the Reed family arrived at the hospital in a flurry of panic and accusation. Brenda Reed, Maddie's stepmother, swept through the ER doors, face pinched, hair still perfect under her snow-dusted scarf. "Where is she? Where's my Maddie?" Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the low hospital murmur. Nurses led her to Maddie's room, where the little girl lay bundled in heated blankets. Max curled up protectively at her side. Maddie didn't look up. She didn't react when Brenda burst in, nor when her stepbrother, teenage Logan, hovered awkwardly in the doorway. Brenda's eyes darted from her stepdaughter to John, who stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, feeling every ounce of the town's gaze settle on him. "You!" Brenda hissed, rounding on John. "Who are you? Why was my stepdaughter in your house? What were you doing with her?" The words spilled out, accusations barely veiled as questions. John tried to keep his voice calm. "I found her in the park. She was freezing. I only wanted to help. She's just a child. And you took her." Brenda's voice rose, drawing attention. Down the hall, a nurse quietly called for security. Logan stared at the floor, cheeks flaming with embarrassment. The police came again, this time with an officer John recognized from his church. The questions were sharper now. "Did you have permission to take Maddie to your house, Mr. Parker? Why didn't you bring her straight to the hospital?" "Did you know her before last night?" John explained, again, about the storm, the snow, the impossible distance, how he'd only wanted to save her life. But suspicion had a way of settling in people's minds, especially when fear and pride collided. Brenda demanded answers from everyone, doctors, officers, nurses, loud enough for the whole hospital to hear. "This is abduction. My husband's away for work, and our little girl is found with some stranger. I want her back. I want that dog away from her." But Maddie clung tighter to Max, burying her face in his fur, whimpering whenever anyone tried to separate them. It didn't take long for rumors to spiral. Someone posted on the Billings community forum, "Who is John Parker, and why did he take that girl?" Others chimed in, some defending John as a widower known for fixing broken fences for free, some warning that you never really know a person. By lunchtime, a reporter from the local station was on the scene, camera crew in tow, sniffing for a headline. Social services arrived before John could even collect his thoughts. A woman in a gray pantsuit introduced herself as Miss Carlyle, voice gentle but practiced. "We're here for Maddie's well-being," she assured Brenda, but her careful glance at John said otherwise. "Standard procedure, Mr. Parker. We'll need your statement again." Maddie, still mute, refused to speak, eat, or even meet anyone's eyes, except Max's. The shepherd, though limping and battered, growled at every attempt to separate him from her. The hospital's child psychologist tried soft voices and puppets, but nothing worked. Maddie's world was the narrow space between herself and the dog. John watched, helpless, as the caseworker made notes. That afternoon, the sheriff called John into a small office. "I'm not saying you did anything wrong," he said quietly, "but folks are scared, and Brenda Reed is loud. Be careful. People see what they want to see in a storm like this." Outside the hospital, TV crews set up, their breath fogging in the cold as they recorded live updates. "Is this a case of heroism or something more sinister?" the anchor asked. "The town is divided." That night, back in his empty house, John's phone rang off the hook. Neighbors calling to offer support, or to warn him of what Brenda was saying around town. Anonymous numbers left ugly voicemails, accusing him of everything from kidnapping to worse. John stared at the walls, every memory of his wife's laughter swallowed up by the growing storm outside. Meanwhile, social services faced their own challenge. Maddie would not let go of Max. Attempts to move her without the dog led to panic, screaming, tears, a wild scramble to clutch his fur. One nurse, shaken, told the caseworker, "I've never seen a bond like that. The dog's the only thing keeping her here." Brenda, frustrated, threatened to sue the hospital if they didn't get that animal away from my daughter. But the doctors pushed back, warning that any abrupt separation could cause Maddie to shut down entirely. The caseworker relented, for now. Max could stay. On the third day, John visited Maddie's room, bringing a small wooden birdhouse he'd made. He set it on her bedside table, hoping for a spark of curiosity. Maddie didn't react, but Max sniffed it, then settled beside her. John watched them, feeling a connection he couldn't explain, a shared sense of loss and longing. Brenda glared at John from the corner, then snapped a picture of him on her phone. "This isn't over," she whispered. John left the hospital with a heavy heart, the weight of the town's judgment pressing down. Outside, a crowd had gathered, some shouting support, others holding homemade signs that read, "Protect our children." The media closed in, cameras flashing, questions flying. John ducked his head, pushing through the chaos. In that moment, he realized the blizzard outside had given way to a different kind of storm, one built from suspicion, fear, and the fragile lines between trust and accusation. And somewhere inside, Maddie huddled closer to Max, silent as snowfall, trusting only the dog who'd never left her side. The storm finally cleared, but John Parker's life was now a whirlwind in its own right. As the snow outside melted into icy puddles, a new siege began at his doorstep. Cameras lined his street. Reporters and townsfolk pressed in, their faces sharp with suspicion or eager curiosity. A yellowed piece of caution tape fluttered in the wind outside his gate, the cold warning echoing the chill that had settled inside John's own chest. Each morning, John awoke to the distant drone of news vans idling in the road, and the uneasy silence that filled his kitchen. The house felt smaller now, every creak in the floorboards a reminder that he was being watched. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized the tired man staring back at him. The shadows beneath his eyes, the worry etched into his forehead, the grief still quietly gnawing at his insides. The phone rang constantly. Sometimes it was a neighbor, an old friend from the hardware store, offering support, a casserole, a whispered, "Hang in there, John." More often, it was a stranger, their voice cold, accusing, or just plain curious. "What really happened out there? Did you know that girl before? Why won't she talk?" The questions circled, never ending. Maddie, released from the hospital under strict supervision, now stayed with John, at least until social services made a final decision. She moved through the house like a shadow, silent, eyes always darting, clutching Max as if he were her last lifeline. The dog, wounded paw bandaged and side still raw from the ice, never let her out of his sight. He slept at her feet, ate only when she did, barked sharply if John got too close. Sometimes late at night, John heard her small voice humming softly to Max. Broken melodies, fragments of lullabies lost in the darkness. Despite all his careful attempts, John struggled to reach her. He left books with bright covers on the kitchen table, crayons and paper by the window, a music box on her bedside table. Maddie ignored them all. If anyone other than Max approached her, she would shrink back, eyes wide, her small hands gripping the shepherd's fur until her knuckles turned white. Once, when a reporter tried to snap her picture through the front window, Maddie screamed, sending Max into a barking frenzy that lasted nearly an hour. Desperate, John turned to the only comfort he knew: his late wife's journal. He'd started writing to her after she died, a habit that had become his nightly ritual. In those pages, he poured out everything he couldn't say aloud. "Ellie, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. The town thinks I'm a monster. This little girl, she's so broken. I see her flinch, and I remember how you used to tell me to have patience, to listen with my heart, not just my ears. God, I wish you were here." Sometimes he'd close his eyes and imagine her voice, gentle, practical, laughing at his stubbornness, reminding him that healing never followed a straight path. One afternoon, as the sun finally warmed the snowbanks into heavy, dripping slush, Mrs. Collier appeared at his door. She was John's elderly neighbor, a wiry woman with quick eyes and a shuffling gait, famous for her molasses cookies and quiet wisdom. She carried a basket, which she set on the porch with a polite knock. "You probably don't want company," she said, "but everyone needs a little something sweet on a hard day." John accepted the cookies with a tight smile, grateful for her calm presence. "You must be tired, John," she said, glancing inside at Maddie and Max. "Don't let the noise from outside drown out what matters. Kids know kindness, even when they can't say it yet." Later, Mrs. Collier dropped by with more than cookies. She brought a handful of birdseed, showing Maddie how to scatter it outside the window for the chickadees. She spoke softly, never pushing, simply sharing the small, hopeful rituals of daily life. Maddie didn't respond, but she watched the birds with wide eyes, and Max's tail wagged whenever Mrs. Collier was near. But outside, the chaos only grew. News vans parked on the curb day and night. Anonymous letters arrived in John's mailbox, some full of hate, others trembling with hope that he could somehow fix the broken child. Online forums sizzled with speculation. Was John a hero or something worse? The town divided. At the market, John felt eyes on him, heard the hiss of whispered rumors. At church, the pew beside him was empty for the first time in years. The weight grew heavier. That night, John wrote in his journal, "Ellie, I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. I miss you every day." Maddie's silence is a mirror, reminding me of everything I lost and everything I'm afraid to feel. In the darkness, Maddie lay awake, Max's breath warm against her cheek. She remembered fragments, her mother's lullabies, the icy sting of snow, the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her chest. She remembered the storm, the playground, the way Max had pressed his body against hers, keeping her awake, keeping her alive. She didn't understand the grown-up's anger. She didn't know why her stepmother yelled, why John's voice trembled when he talked to her, why the world outside seemed filled with so many strangers. All she knew was that Max was safe, and as long as he was there, maybe she could be safe too. Outside, the last of the storm melted away, but inside the Parker house the battle had just begun. Not just for custody, but for the fragile hope that trust and love could heal what had been shattered. And as the night deepened, John Parker wrote one last line to his wife, voice breaking in the silent house. "If you can see us, Ellie, please send a sign, because I don't know how to save her, or myself, without you." And somewhere between the scratch of his pen and the slow, steady breath of a sleeping child and her loyal dog, the first fragile seeds of hope began to take root. In the days after Maddie returned to John's house, the winter sun struggled to break through heavy clouds, casting the town in a perpetual twilight. The storm had passed, but its chill lingered, both in the drifts that rimmed every sidewalk and in the wounds left behind, on the town, on John, on the little girl and her loyal dog. In those first fragile mornings, it was Max who began to change. He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that made John's heart drop. At first, John tried to convince himself it was just the stress or cold, but Max's limp grew worse. The dog became lethargic, his appetite fading, eyes glassy and dull. Maddie noticed immediately. She refused to leave Max's side, curling up with him on the rug near the fireplace, whispering into his ear. When John approached, she flinched, panic swelling in her eyes. That evening, Maddie's panic boiled over. She sobbed quietly, face hidden in Max's fur, her body trembling. John's chest tightened at the sight, the helplessness raw and suffocating. He tried everything: warm broth for Max, blankets by the fire, soft words that barely reached Maddie's world. Nothing seemed to help. John slept fitfully in the armchair, afraid to leave them alone. By morning, Max refused even the smallest treat. John knew he had to act. He bundled Max carefully in an old comforter, then turned to Maddie. "We're going to help Max," he said softly, kneeling so they were eye to eye. She stared back, wordless but fiercely protective. He gently coaxed her into the truck, Max lying between them. The drive to the vet was silent except for the dog's ragged breaths and the dull hum of the engine. At the clinic, Dr. Evans, who'd seen every dog in Billings at least once, listened with grim focus. "He's got frostbite on his pads and an infection," the vet explained, examining Max with practiced hands. "He's a fighter, but he needs rest, fluids, antibiotics. He'll have to stay here for a bit." Maddie burst into tears, clinging to Max's neck, refusing to let the vet techs take him away. John knelt beside her, feeling utterly inadequate. He remembered the way his wife had always known what to say, how to find the right words. All he could do was gently hold Maddie's hand, letting her grip him with surprising strength. After a long negotiation, Dr. Evans finally agreeing to let Maddie stay in the waiting room with a blanket. John sat beside her, hour after hour, listening to the wind rattle the windows. When they returned home that night, Maddie wandered the house like a lost spirit. She pressed her face to the window, waiting for headlights, for the bark that would mean Max was home again. She refused dinner, ignored John's gentle offers of cocoa and story time. That night, John found her curled up in Max's bed, silent tears soaking the dog's old blanket. John felt the weight of it all, the town's suspicion, Brenda's accusations, his own aching loneliness, crashed down on him. He sat at the kitchen table, flipping open his wife's journal, searching for comfort in her words. If you're hurting, John, let yourself feel it. You don't have to fix everything. Sometimes loving someone is just staying near, not turning away. He closed his eyes, letting the memory of her voice steady him. The next day, determined to reach Maddie somehow, John tried something new. He brought out his toolbox and some scrap wood, setting up at the kitchen table. I used to build birdhouses with my wife, he said softly. She loved watching the chickadees. Maddie didn't answer, but she watched as he sawed and hammered, the rhythmic sound filling the empty house. He left the finished birdhouse on the windowsill, hoping it might catch her curiosity. He tried again at bedtime, bringing out his wife's old music box, the one that played a gentle lullaby. He wound it up and set it on the nightstand in Maddie's room. The tiny tune filled the darkness, and for the first time Maddie didn't turn away. Instead, she reached for the box, her fingers tracing its painted flowers. Later that week, Dr. Evans called. Max is strong. He's ready to come home, but you'll need to keep a close eye on him. The relief in Maddie's eyes when Max hobbled through the door was immediate and overwhelming. She flung her arms around his neck, sobbing openly. John watched from the doorway, his own eyes burning. That night, something changed. As John tucked Maddie into bed, Max at her side, Maddie looked up, her voice so soft John almost missed it. "Stay, Max," she whispered. The dog thumped his tail. Mrs. Collier, who'd brought over a basket of blueberry muffins that afternoon, was in the kitchen and heard it too. She met John's eyes, smiling through tears. "That's the first time I've heard her speak." John felt hope flicker. Fragile but real, he recorded the moment in his journal. "Ellie, she spoke. To the dog, not me, but still. Maybe we're getting through." As the days passed, Maddie slowly emerged from her shell. She started following John from room to room, always with Max by her side. She let John help her with her boots, even sat beside him while he read stories, though she never spoke directly to him. The town outside was still divided, and Brenda was more determined than ever to prove John unfit. But in the quiet warmth of the Parker house, small miracles bloomed. John realized he was changing too. His guilt over his wife's death, so raw, so ever-present, softened as he poured himself into caring for Maddie and Max. He saw in Maddie's fierce loyalty a reflection of his own need for forgiveness. Every gentle word, every act of kindness felt like a step toward healing, not just for Maddie but for himself. One night, as snow fell quietly outside, John watched Maddie sleep, Max curled protectively against her. He whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Ellie, for teaching me that even in the deepest winter, hope can take root." And in that moment, John understood. Saving Maddie and Max wasn't just about giving them a second chance. It was about finding his own. Snow still lined the streets of Billings, turning everything outside the courthouse into a painting of white silence and gray winter skies. But inside, the air crackled with tension and suspicion. John Parker stood in the cramped hallway, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his only suit jacket, feeling more like a criminal than a rescuer. Maddie clung tightly to Max, who sat at her feet, ears up, eyes scanning each new face with loyal determination. It seemed half the town had come to witness the hearing. Neighbors, reporters, and curious strangers, all whispering behind gloved hands. Brenda Reed arrived late, sweeping through the doors in a storm of perfume and outrage. Her lawyer, Mr. Dunlap, walked beside her, clutching a thick folder filled with every possible accusation. Brenda barely spared John a glance before heading straight to Maddie, but the little girl only shrank behind Max, her fingers tangled in the shepherd's thick fur. John felt a pang of sympathy and anger. This child didn't need more fighting. She needed peace. When the judge finally called the room to order, everyone took their seats. John sat stiffly at the defendant's table, Maddie next to him with Max at her feet. Brenda and her lawyer sat across the aisle, their faces set and determined. Social workers lined the back row, notebooks open, pens poised. Brenda's case was built on outrage and fear. Her lawyer painted John as reckless, even dangerous, a lonely widower who'd abducted a traumatized child in the middle of a blizzard. He described Maddie as unstable, clinging desperately to a stray dog, unable to function in a normal home. Brenda dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, sighing dramatically for the judge's benefit. John's own lawyer, a steady, soft-spoken woman named Miss Harper, countered with calm facts. She explained the conditions of the rescue, the freezing temperatures, and John's desperate decision to save a life. She described Max's role as Maddie's guardian angel and told the court how Maddie had spoken her first words to the dog, a breakthrough witnessed by Mrs. Collier and the vet. "This is a child who's already lost so much," Miss Harper concluded. "What she needs now isn't disruption or more trauma. She needs stability and trust." The judge listened in silence, her eyes flicking between the adults and the little girl curled up beside the dog. When it was time to speak, Maddie's cousin Sarah, a quiet high school senior, stood up, her hands shaking as she faced the courtroom. "I need to say something," she said. Brenda tried to wave her down, but the judge nodded. "Go ahead, Sarah." Sarah's voice trembled but didn't break. "I've seen how Brenda treats Maddie. She's not a mother to her. She's never patient, always yelling, always telling Maddie to get out of the way. She didn't even know Maddie was missing until the police called. And she hates that dog. But Max is the only one Maddie trusts." A hush fell over the courtroom. Brenda's face twisted in shock and fury, but the judge held up a hand. "Thank you, Sarah. That was brave." John watched Maddie during the testimony. She didn't look up, but her hand found Max's ear, and she stroked it slowly, seeking comfort. When John tried to meet her eyes, she flinched but did not pull away. The social worker spoke next, confirming what Sarah had said. "We've observed a remarkable bond between Maddie and Max. Any attempt to separate them results in severe emotional distress. Maddie shows signs of trauma, but she is slowly responding to the safe environment Mr. Parker provides. Removing her now would likely cause regression." Brenda's lawyer objected, but the judge silenced him with a look. "Mr. Parker," she said, "do you have anything you wish to say?" John stood, heart pounding. He looked at the judge, at Maddie, at the sea of faces. "I never meant to cause trouble. I just wanted to help. Maddie and Max saved each other out there in the snow. I know what it's like to lose someone. I lost my wife last year, and some days it's hard to keep going. But when I see Maddie smile at Max, even for a second, I think maybe we can all heal together. That's all I want. For her to be safe. For both of them to have a chance. Silence fell, thick as the snow outside. The judge took a long moment, then announced her decision. Given the circumstances and the evidence presented, especially the testimony from Sarah and the observations of social services, I am granting Mr. Parker temporary custody of Maddie Reed, pending further investigation. Max will remain with her. The court will appoint a guardian ad litem and continue to monitor Maddie's well-being. Relief washed through John, weak and dizzying. Maddie squeezed Max and, for a moment, even looked up at John with wide, uncertain eyes. Brenda launched into protest, her voice rising, but the judge was firm. Miss Reed, your actions and lack of awareness regarding Maddie's whereabouts raise serious concerns. The court is putting Maddie's needs first. Afterward, outside the courtroom, townsfolk gathered. Some offered cautious smiles. Others kept their distance, still uncertain about the man at the center of the storm. Mrs. Collier found John as he stepped out into the chill, pressing a small envelope into his hand. "For Maddie," she whispered, "and for you. Keep fighting, John." John knelt beside Maddie in the parking lot, brushing snow from her hair. "We're going to be okay, kiddo," he said softly. Max barked, tail wagging, as if he understood. For the first time, Maddie managed a tiny, hopeful smile. Just a glimmer, but enough. That night, John wrote in his journal again, his heart lighter than it had been in months. "Ellie, we're still here. It's not over. But maybe, just maybe, we're on the way home." And in the warm glow of the living room, Maddie curled up with Max, a fragile peace settling over them as the winter night closed in. The days after the hearing felt quieter, but a sharp tension hummed beneath the peace. The temporary custody ruling let John breathe a little easier, but everyone in the Parker house knew the storm wasn't over. Each morning, John made pancakes, trying to coax smiles from Maddie. Sometimes he got a shy glance, sometimes nothing. Max, who everyone now called Ranger after a joke Mrs. Collier made about his bravery, remained glued to Maddie's side, their bond growing stronger with every sunrise. But the town watched, and Brenda Reed didn't give up easily. She prowled the sidewalk in her heavy coat, staring daggers at John's windows. Rumors swirled that she was planning something, and John's nerves twitched with every knock at the door or unexpected phone call. Even so, he tried to build something normal, a safe little world of routines. Pancakes in the morning, books in the afternoon, a slow walk with Maddie and Ranger each dusk. He'd fix squeaky hinges and shovel walks for neighbors, quietly rebuilding the trust that suspicion had eroded. But then, one frosty afternoon, everything changed. It happened in a blink. Maddie and Ranger were in the yard, bundled in their winter coats. John had ducked inside to grab more firewood. When he returned, Maddie was on her knees in the snow, crying, her mittened hands clutching at nothing. Ranger was gone. Panic slammed through John. He rushed outside, calling Ranger's name, searching every yard, every drift. Maddie's cries rose, desperate and wild. "Where's Ranger? Where's Ranger?" she choked out, the few words she'd learned to trust now broken by fear. John scooped her up, heart pounding, and raced through the neighborhood, shouting for help. Neighbors came out, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Collier, seeing Maddie's tears, joined John immediately. "I'll check the alley," she said, voice tight. John called local teens he'd mentored in his carpentry class, kids who still believed he was a hero. Within minutes, search parties formed, combing the blocks, calling, whistling, looking in sheds and under porches. As the sun dipped low, painting the snow with bruised purple shadows. Dread grew heavier. Maddie refused to leave John's arms. Brenda arrived, her face twisted with worry and something darker, a flicker of triumph, perhaps, or satisfaction. "If you can't even keep track of that animal," she spat, "how can you care for Maddie?" John ignored her, his focus only on the desperate girl in his arms. "We'll find him, Maddie. I promise." But as darkness settled, doubt gnawed at him. Ranger was smart, but he was hurt too. What if he was trapped? Or worse, taken? A cold realization began to grow. Brenda had orchestrated this. She'd never hidden her hatred for the dog, and now, with Ranger gone, Maddie was adrift, mute, trembling, withdrawn. John called the sheriff, filed a report, begged for help. The sheriff promised to spread the word, but with the storm's damage and the town's divided loyalties, John sensed he was mostly on his own. That night was the hardest John could remember. Maddie curled up in his lap, sobbing into his shirt. He held her, rocking gently, whispering stories about brave dogs and happy endings. But nothing eased her grief. When she finally slept, exhausted and tear-stained, John slipped outside. The snow reflected the moonlight, silent and cruel. He knelt, hands buried in his coat pockets, and prayed. Not for himself, but for Ranger, wherever he was. The next morning, Maddie was silent as stone. She refused breakfast, didn't respond to John or even Mrs. Collier, who arrived with her usual basket and gentle encouragement. John tried everything, music, crafts, even baking cookies, but nothing broke through. Maddie was locked away, unreachable. John's worry grew into despair. He called every vet, shelter, and neighbor. He posted flyers offering a reward. The teens kept searching, some texting him every hour with updates, but the hours stretched and hope thinned. Late on the second day, a young man from John's carpentry class called. "I think I found something. At the old cemetery." John's heart lurched. He bundled Maddie into the truck and drove through icy streets, headlights slicing the dusk. The cemetery stood silent, snow covering the gravestones like old memories. John's boots crunched as he hurried past rows of names. At the far end, near a weathered marble angel, he saw them. Ranger, battered and bleeding, curled at the base of a gravestone. Ellie Parker's gravestone. John's late wife. John's breath caught. Ranger's fur was matted, a gash above one eye. But when he saw Maddie, his tail thumped weakly. Maddie broke free from John, rushing forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. She fell to her knees, wrapping her arms around Ranger, whispering his name over and over. John knelt, running his hands gently along Ranger's side, whispering thanks. Behind them, the teens who'd found Ranger stood quietly, hats in hand. John turned to them, voice shaking. "Thank you. You saved him. You saved us." Maddie looked up at John, her face streaked with tears, and did something she'd never done before. She threw her arms around John's neck and buried her face in his shoulder. "Daddy, please, don't let him go." The word, Daddy, struck John like a bell, clear and beautiful. For a moment, the whole world went still. John wrapped Maddie and Ranger in his arms, tears of relief streaming down his face. In the cold, beneath the stone that marked all he'd lost, John understood what he'd gained. Family, hope, and the beginning of real healing. That night, as the snow began to fall again, John wrote in his journal, "Ellie, I found him, at your grave. I think maybe you sent him back to us." And Maddie, she called me Daddy. For the first time, I believe we might just be okay. The word spread faster than any winter wind. Ranger had been found, battered but alive, at Ellie Parker's grave. Maddie was safe. John's arms wrapped around her. The whole rescue witnessed by half a dozen teens who swore they'd never forget it. That story, heartbreak and reunion under the cold Montana sky, swept through Billings like a second blizzard. For the first time in weeks, the gossip and suspicion swirling around John Parker began to thaw. Brenda tried to keep her narrative alive, spinning tales of irresponsibility and dangerous animals, but it was no use. The news was out, and people had seen Brenda's rage firsthand at the courthouse. Mrs. Collier was the first to step forward, telling her friends and neighbors how John had opened his home to a broken child and a half-frozen dog, how she'd seen Maddie begin to heal, how the only constant in that child's recovery had been John's gentle persistence and the unconditional loyalty of Ranger. A few days later, the local paper ran a front-page story titled "Bravery in the Blizzard," recounting the rescue, the custody battle, and the community's divided loyalties. This time, however, the tone had shifted. John wasn't painted as a suspect anymore. He was a neighbor who'd risked everything, a man still mourning his wife, a man who'd done what he could for a child in trouble. Neighbors began to remember small kindnesses. The porch repairs John had done for free, the bags of groceries he'd dropped on stoops when a family was struggling, the way he'd fixed the church roof after a hailstorm. At first, only a few dared to speak out. Mrs. Collier led the charge, organizing a community potluck. "It's not just about John and Maddie," she declared. "It's about who we want to be as a town. Are we a place that turns on our own, or a place that stands together when someone is hurting?" People responded. Sarah, Maddie's cousin, went online, sharing what she'd witnessed and how Brenda had neglected Maddie long before the blizzard. Other teens joined in, describing how John had mentored them in shop class, never asking for anything in return. Stories tumbled out about John's quiet strength, his patience, the way he always showed up for those in need. Social media posts changed their tune. Where once there had been ugly rumors and harsh judgment, there was now gratitude, praise, even apologies. "I misjudged John Parker," one neighbor wrote. "Turns out, he's the kind of man this town needs more of." The sheriff stopped John in the grocery store to shake his hand. Even the mail carrier, who'd barely spoken to John before, left a note in his mailbox. "Thanks for not giving up on her, or on us." Brenda tried to fight back, threatening lawsuits, calling talk shows, but each effort only made her look more bitter and petty. Eventually, social services launched a new investigation, this time into Brenda's household. Maddie's cousin Sarah provided testimony, and other relatives stepped forward, confirming patterns of neglect and emotional coldness. It was clear the tide had turned. One afternoon, John was fixing a squeaky step on his porch when Mrs. Collier bustled up with a handful of flyers. "I have an idea, John. The whole town wants to help, and Maddie needs something to believe in. So do you, I think. We're going to build a community center, right here in Billings, a place for kids and for rescues like Ranger. We'll call it Ranger's Refuge. Will you help lead it?" John stared at her, stunned. The idea was so unexpected, so generous, that for a moment he could only nod. "Yes, of course, whatever you need." Mrs. Collier grinned. "I already knew you'd say yes. Now come on, we've got a fundraiser to plan." The word spread, and soon Ranger's Refuge was everywhere, on posters, in church bulletins, on social media. People donated what they could: time, money, building supplies, even bags of dog food. John found himself at the center of something bigger than any courtroom battle. Maddie began to help too, coloring signs, sorting donated toys, following John and Ranger as they visited the site where the new center would stand. One morning, as the first tools broke ground at the lot, John found Maddie sitting quietly on a bench beside a small boy, tears streaking the child's cheeks. Without a word, Maddie reached out and squeezed his hand, then let Ranger lay his head in the boy's lap. The boy stopped crying, smiling instead. Mrs. Collier saw it all and wiped away a tear of her own. That afternoon, John wrote in his journal, "Ellie, if you could see us now, you'd be proud. Maddie is finding her voice. She's helping others already in small ways. Maybe we're not just healing, we're growing into something new." At the next Sunday service, the pastor invited John and Maddie to stand before the congregation. Maddie clung to John's hand. Ranger pressed against her legs. The pastor spoke of family, of loyalty, and of second chances. "This town was broken," he said, "but in helping Maddie and Ranger, John reminded us that we are never truly alone if we stand together." The congregation rose in applause, and for the first time since Ellie's death, John felt the full embrace of his community. Maddie smiled, an unguarded, radiant smile, and Ranger barked once, as if to cheer them all on. That evening, as snow began to fall once more, John, Maddie, and Ranger stood at the window, watching the flakes drift down. But this time, they didn't see a threat. They saw hope. A new chapter had begun, not just for them, but for the entire town of Billings. The winds finally quieted over Billings, Montana, as if winter itself had paused to catch its breath. The courthouse stood somber and cold, but inside, everything had changed. Brenda sat rigid in her seat, her lawyer whispering in her ear, but there was no more fire in her eyes. Evidence had mounted: Sarah's testimony, statements from teachers and neighbors, the pattern of neglect impossible to deny. Even Brenda's own relatives stopped defending her, shaking their heads in quiet shame. The town had made its choice. The judge's voice rang steady through the chamber. "For the well-being of Madison Reed, full legal guardianship is awarded to Jonathan Parker. This case is closed." A hush swept over the courtroom. John squeezed Maddie's hand, feeling her pulse quicken beneath his gentle grip. Maddie, no longer shrinking away from touch, glanced up at him, hopeful, wide-eyed, and for once not afraid. Ranger rested his head on Maddie's knee, tail wagging softly, a living symbol of the journey they had survived together. Brenda stood abruptly, gathering her things, but the glare she shot John was brittle, exhausted. For all her threats and legal maneuvering, she'd lost not only custody, but the trust of an entire town. She withdrew her case with a bitter finality, promising lawsuits that everyone knew would never come. By the time she reached the courthouse doors, most people had already looked away. Outside, neighbors clustered around John, offering congratulations and embraces. Even the sheriff stopped by to clap him on the back, his stern face breaking into a smile. "You did right by that little girl, John, and this town owes you more than you know." Maddie squeezed John's hand tighter, holding on as if to anchor herself in this new, uncertain happiness. The story didn't end in the courtroom. In the weeks that followed, John, Maddie, and Ranger stepped into a whirlwind of new beginnings. The Rangers' Refuge project took off, the old recreation center transforming beneath a storm of hammers, paint, and laughter. Volunteers streamed in. Neighbors who'd once doubted John now offered their time and hands, eager to build something lasting. John threw himself into the work, his carpentry skills turning empty rooms into bright spaces. Maddie helped paint murals, her small handprints mixing with those of other children, the walls blooming with scenes of dogs and snowy forests, children and animals together in a swirl of hope. Ranger became a fixture at the center, greeting every child at the door, his limp a badge of honor and his calm presence an anchor for kids who carried their own invisible wounds. For Maddie, The transformation was both sudden and slow. Some mornings she still woke up afraid, clutching at John's sleeve or calling for Ranger in the dark. But each day brought new victories. She spoke more, first in whispers to Ranger, then in short sentences to John and Mrs. Collier, and eventually to other children at the center. She learned to laugh again, loud, unguarded laughter that made John's chest ache with gratitude. Sometimes she would curl up beside John on the couch and listen as he read stories, her head on his shoulder, Ranger dozing at their feet. On the day Ranger's refuge opened, the whole town gathered. Snowflakes drifted down, but the air was filled with warmth, laughter, music, the thump of hammers and saws finishing last-minute repairs. The mayor gave a short speech, then handed the microphone to John. John swallowed hard, scanning the faces, neighbors, friends, children, all gathered in hope. Maddie stood beside him, her hair in bright pigtails, a shy smile on her face. "I'm not much for speeches," John began, his voice rough with emotion. "But I want to thank everyone here. Ranger and Maddie saved each other. I was lucky enough to be caught in the middle. This place isn't just for us. It's for every child and every animal who's ever needed a second chance. Thank you for believing in us." The crowd cheered, and Mrs. Collier wiped her eyes, grinning proudly. After the ribbon cutting, kids streamed inside. Maddie led the way, Ranger at her side, showing a new girl where the snacks were, offering her a handmade bracelet. The center hummed with life, music, laughter, the joyful chaos of beginnings. As evening settled, John sat in his quiet kitchen, Ranger's head on his knee, Maddie curled in his lap. He opened his wife's journal for what felt like the 100th time, the pages soft and worn. "Ellie, I didn't rescue Maddie and Ranger. They rescued me. You always said I needed a purpose, a way to heal. I think this is it. We're not the same people we were before, but maybe that's the point. Sometimes, love means showing up, even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared." Later, as snow dusted the windows, John watched Maddie and Ranger sleeping, their faces peaceful at last. The old grief still lingered, but it was no longer the only thing in the house. There was laughter now, and hope, and a future that felt wide open. The next day, Maddie found John out in the yard, hammering together a new sign for the center. She slipped her small hand into his, smiling up at him. "Can I help, Daddy?" John smiled back, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. "You already are, sweetheart." Together they finished the sign, Ranger's Refuge, a home for second chances, and as John looked at the handprints on the wall, the light in Maddie's eyes, and Ranger stretched out in the snow, he knew that in saving each other, they'd built something that would outlast even the hardest winter. Spring was beginning to win its slow war against winter. Snowdrifts melted into trickling streams. The first green shoots poked through the frosted earth, and Billings found itself awakening, changed, softer, maybe even stronger than before. The air was fresh and bright, the town's old wounds healing in ways as subtle and persistent as the thaw. For the first time, John Parker sat down not to write to Ellie, but to listen. Maddie was at his side, Ranger sprawled across both their feet, sunlight painting golden stripes across the kitchen floor. The morning was quiet, yet rich with the unspoken music of a home at peace. John closed his journal and smiled at Maddie. "Do you ever think about before all this?" he asked gently. Maddie, who'd grown a little taller, a little braver, tucked her chin into her knees. Her eyes were steady, not wide with fear anymore. "Sometimes," Mostly I remember being cold, but I remember you coming. And Ranger, I was scared, but you stayed. Her voice was soft, but sure. You didn't leave. John nodded, brushing a hand over Ranger's fur. I think I was just as lost as you, Maddie. Maybe more. Losing Ellie. I didn't think I could keep going. Sometimes I still don't. But you and Ranger, you brought me back. He paused, his voice thick. You taught me that healing doesn't happen all at once. It's slow. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it feels like nothing's changing. Then one day you realize you're laughing again. Maddie grinned, leaning into him. I like laughing, she whispered. It's like sunshine in my chest. They both laughed then, and Ranger thumped his tail, as if agreeing. That afternoon, Maddie spent time at Ranger's refuge, her confidence blossoming. She ran crafts for younger kids, showed them how to gently approach nervous dogs, and read stories aloud while Ranger lay beside her. She was gentle with the children, who flinched at loud noises, patient with the shy ones, always willing to sit and listen. The other kids began to follow her lead, trusting her, just as she had learned to trust John and Ranger. John watched this transformation with quiet awe. He'd always believed that wounds made you weaker, but he was learning that sometimes the most broken among us become the strongest healers. Maddie's pain didn't disappear, but it gave her a deep empathy. Ranger's own scars, physical and emotional, became a bridge, not a wall. People who once would have turned away from each other now met in the center's bright rooms, drawn together by kindness and shared experience. One day, after the last of the kids had left, John and Maddie sat on the steps of the center, watching the sky turn gold. Mrs. Collier joined them, her knitting needles clicking. She smiled at Maddie. You know, honey, you've changed this town. It wasn't just the snow or John's big heart. It was you. People remember what it means to take care of each other now. Maddie looked thoughtful. Sometimes I still feel scared, she admitted. Mrs. Collier nodded. That's all right, sweetheart. We all do. The important thing is you keep going. You trust again. You help the next person who's scared. That night, John and Maddie lay in the living room, Ranger snoring softly at their feet. John turned to Maddie. Can I tell you something? She nodded. I used to think family was something you were born into, but now I think it's something you build, day by day, with kindness and loyalty and love. Maddie wrapped her arms around him. I like our family, she whispered. You, me, Ranger, and Mrs. Collier, too. John hugged her close. Me too. John's reflections deepened as he wrote a new journal entry. Not just for Ellie, but for himself, for Maddie, for Ranger, and for the whole community that had come together against the odds. Ellie, I used to believe grief was a storm I had to survive alone. I thought healing would be a straight line, and if I just tried hard enough, the pain would go away. But I've learned that real healing is messy. There are days I wake up angry or sad or scared I'll lose everything again. Maddie still has nightmares. Ranger sometimes flinches at loud noises, but we face it together. Every act of kindness, every moment of trust, plants something new. We are all changed. Maddie, me, this whole town. We've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, and who loves you at your weakest. The next week, Ranger's Refuge welcomed a new stray, an old, grumpy dog with more scars than fur. Maddie was the first to greet him, kneeling quietly and letting the dog come to her. She whispered to him, the same way she'd once whispered to Ranger, patient and gentle, giving him time. Within days, the dog followed her everywhere. John watched, filled with a quiet pride and gratitude that sometimes brought tears. He'd started the journey believing he was rescuing Maddie and Ranger, but now he understood. Rescue was always mutual. They'd each saved each other, again and again. The community, too, changed. Old grudges faded. Neighbors checked in on one another, looking out for the lost, the lonely, the broken. The town that had once turned on John now embraced him, seeing not just a carpenter, but a man who'd chosen love over fear. Ranger became a local legend, a symbol of loyalty and courage. On a soft evening, as the town gathered for a picnic at the center, John took the microphone. "None of us get through storms alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reach out your hand, even if it's shaking, and say, 'I need help,' or 'I'm here for you.' That's what Maddie and Ranger taught me. That's what all of you taught me." He looked out at the faces, Maddie's, Mrs. Collier's, even Sarah's shy smile in the crowd, and felt a certainty settle in his heart. The greatest family was the one you built with courage, forgiveness, and a stubborn, relentless hope. 1 year later, Billings had shed its old, battered winter skin for a new season of hope. The cold still came. The snow still blanketed the earth, but the storms that once divided the town had softened. Now, when the first flakes fell, the people of Billings remembered more than the blizzard. They remembered a rescue, a trial, and a rebirth that changed the heart of the whole community. John Parker stood at the edge of the schoolyard, watching Maddie run across the field, Ranger at her heels. She wore a yellow coat now, her hair flying in the wind, a bright streak of laughter cutting through the gray. She was thriving. Her teachers called her resilient. Her classmates called her brave. Sometimes when a new student sat alone, Maddie would be the first to take their hand, to introduce them to Ranger, to whisper, "It's okay. You're safe here." After school, Maddie and Ranger walked to Ranger's Refuge, where John worked with a new group of kids. The center had grown, walls freshly painted, the community garden blooming, children's handprints spiraling up the entrance in every color. John spent his days teaching carpentry, fixing bikes, or simply listening to stories that needed to be told. Mrs. Collier knitted blankets in the lobby. Sarah helped with reading hour, and Maddie was always nearby, tending to the animals or making crafts with the younger children. John never imagined his life would become so full again. The ache of Ellie's loss still visited him, sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, but it didn't hollow him out anymore. Instead, it had deepened him, made him more present, more grateful for every ordinary miracle. Maddie's laughter, Ranger's steadfast loyalty, the kindness of friends who had once been strangers. On the first anniversary of Maddie's rescue, the town gathered at Ranger's Refuge for a celebration. The hall was strung with lights, tables piled with food, music rising and falling as children and adults danced together. John stood before the crowd, Maddie on one side, Ranger on the other, his voice steady as he addressed them all. "We all carry storms inside us," John began, his gaze sweeping the room. "Sometimes, life takes away more than we think we can survive. But I've learned that losing everything can also teach you what matters most. Kindness isn't just a gift. It's a responsibility. Each act of compassion, each moment of patience, each time you choose to stand beside someone else, that's what brings light to the darkness." He paused, searching the crowd for familiar faces, Mrs. Collier with her gentle smile, Sarah's shy wave, Maddie's schoolteacher dabbing her eyes. Maddie and Ranger reminded me that rescue is always a two-way street. We didn't just save each other, we built something bigger. Family, hope, a place where no one has to feel alone. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing off the walls like a promise kept. Afterward, Maddie tugged on John's sleeve. "Can we go outside for a minute?" she asked. Together, with Ranger bounding ahead, they stepped out beneath the stars. Snow fell softly, covering the world in a gentle hush. Maddie leaned against John, small but strong, her breath curling in the cold. "Do you miss Ellie?" she asked. John nodded, looking up at the sky. "Every day. But you know what? I think she's with us. In the way we laugh, the way we help people. She'd be proud of you, Maddie. Proud of all of us." Maddie took his hand. "I'm not scared of storms anymore. Not when we're together." John smiled, feeling gratitude swell in his chest. "Me neither, kiddo. Me neither." Inside, the party continued. Stories shared, old wounds remembered, but no longer raw. Ranger stretched out by the fire. Children curled around him, his tail thumping contentedly. He'd become a legend, a hero in every child's eyes. But to John and Maddie, he was family. No more, no less. As the year turned, John found himself mentoring more than just children. Parents came to him for advice on patience, for guidance in the hard work of forgiveness. He taught them what he'd learned, that healing is never linear, that setbacks are part of growth, that vulnerability is the root of strength. Sometimes he would end his talks the same way he ended his journal entries. "Kindness is how we rescue each other. Courage is how we let ourselves be rescued. There's no shame in needing help, and no greater gift than giving it." When the next blizzard swept into Billings, John, Maddie, and Ranger watched it from the comfort of their living room, the fireplace crackling, hot cocoa steaming in their mugs. Maddie pressed her face to the window, watching the snow swirl and dance. Ranger nuzzled her side, his ears twitching at every gust of wind. John wrapped an arm around Maddie, the warmth between them bright and unshakable. "Remember when we were afraid of storms?" he murmured. Maddie grinned, her smile as bright as the snow outside. "Not anymore. Storms mean we get to stay in, tell stories, and be together." John kissed the top of her head. "That's right. Storms can't hurt us anymore. Not with family, not with hope." As the night deepened, John pulled out his journal for the last time, pen poised above the page. "Ellie, you taught me to be brave, to listen, to never give up, even when I was lost. Maddie, Ranger, and I, we found our way home. We built something stronger than grief, something more lasting than pain. We built a family. Thank you for teaching me how to love, even after loss. Thank you for sending Maddie and Ranger when I needed them most. I promise to carry this light forward, for everyone who's still searching through their own storm." The snow kept falling, soft and endless, but inside the Parker house, and across all of Billings, a new season had begun, built on love, forgiveness, and the unbreakable promise that no one would ever be left behind.